as I am waiting out this witch's curse that you can find out about by reading my earlier story, I've decided to pass time by recounting an earlier ghostly encounter I had experienced. Long ago, when I was about 7, I lost my grandmother to pancreatic cancer. Everyone in my family was upset, but I had always felt closest to my grandma, and I felt that I took it the hardest. Even now, I still remember bawling like a huge crybaby at the funeral. It was so bad that my dad had to take me home early because I was disturbing everyone else. Ha ha ha. However, about 7 years later, when I was 14, I had decided to go back to my grandmother's grave to sort of, I don't know, talk to her. I felt so silly speaking to a grave, but I had hoped that she would be able to talk back to me somehow. I visited her grave and left her some, I'm not sure what they're called actually. These flowers were pretty much roses. However, they were pink and very soft, and they smelled wonderful. Grandma knows best, I guess. After saying a few words, I was going through some problems at home and didn't know who else to turn to than a grave. I felt some sudden urge to go back to Grandma's home, which now belongs to my uncle. I decided to spend the night, as the house wasn't too far away from home. When I arrived, I had set up my bed along with my radio and laptop. However, as soon as I entered the home, I felt good. It was odd. I felt that it was just childhood memories getting to me, although slightly abnormal. Oh, how I miss my grandmother. I began to think about all the times we spent together. This led me to her bedroom, which still had a few of her belongings in it. The room was rather large, with a large king-size bed, 2 dressers, a large makeup mirror, and a rocking chair in the corner. It felt rather empty, and I began to move across the room. I believe it was about 6 p.m. As I began to walk across the room, I thought I felt a sort of cold rush in the room. I brushed this off as the air conditioner. Afterwards, I felt this strange feeling. It was one I've never felt before. Nowadays, I recognize this feeling as a sign that a paranormal presence is nearby. At the time, I was naive enough to brush it off as nerves. That was until I passed the makeup mirror. I was so shocked I wanted to scream. My grandmother was in her rocking chair. She looked pale and smoky. I could kind of see through her. I couldn't tell if I was paralyzed with fear, sadness, or joy. I just wanted to hug her, but I felt frozen. She had this look of happiness upon her face. She had the same smile she always had on her face, and she was looking at me as if she was proud. At this point, I wanted to cry. I know I'm such a baby. I wanted to turn around, but I was afraid that she wouldn't be there. I placed my hand on the glass, and I lowered my head. I sort of began to feel sick. I loved her so much, but I knew deep in my heart that she couldn't have been there, that she wasn't alive and wouldn't come back. Whatever this was, I felt that it wasn't her. However, she just sat there, smiling. Then she began to speak. I couldn't hear her, but she was clearly mouthing words. My eyes were so teared up, I couldn't make out what she was saying. Soon she began to turn her head, and tears ran down her own face. At this point, I felt the opposite of what I felt before. I felt that she knew that I didn't believe it to be true, that I wanted her to leave. She began to fade, and I screamed out, "Don't go." I quickly turned and ran, but as I feared, she wasn't there. I fell apart on the rocker. Luckily, my uncle wasn't home to see this, and I bawled. However, I felt a sort of pressure on my shoulder, like someone was patting it. I placed my hand where I felt this and felt reassured that she was with me. Nowadays, I have become more sensitive to spirits. I'm no form of medium whatsoever, and I can't truly detect or track down spirits with some form of sixth sense. But I always know when a spirit is nearby, such as if it's in the same room as. I will on occasion see stronger spirits that appear as shadows or blurs. Paranormal events seem to follow me, but I feel that my grandmother is here, protecting me. When things get really bad, such as a shade attempting to wrest control of my home, or even my own body from me, I can rely on one power to protect me from anything. No, it's not my grandmother. It's me. If my own will can rise up against the will of a typical shade, then it has no power over me. Now, demons are another story, and I hope I won't have to deal with one for a while. But I know that my believing in myself and the people around me that I love and that love me, will be strong enough to get me through the trials that face me in the future. This tale is a recounting of another experience I had this past Halloween. So, for those of you that haven't read any of my stories yet, I am a tad bit sensitive to spirits. I'm so used to paranormal activity that I'm actually very casual about it, unless it's necessarily violent. Even then, I'll still act cool about it. Finding hilarity in the presence of fear really helps one cope with this lifestyle. Anyways, last Halloween, my gypsy/Wiccan friend Becca decided it would be cool for a group of believers to go to a local legendary area. We call this place the Road of the Cross. I do believe that the place has a proper name. However, we do not know it. Before that, I would like to go into a little backstory to my dear friend Becca. Becca is very popular at my school for being very brash, brave, honest, and beautiful. She has some Roma in her family, and she is a Wiccan in a more spiritual sense rather than bloodline. We actually became friends due to my spiritual encounters. She cannot feel spirits the same way I can. However, she has the natural impulses most people have, which is usually certain emotional stimuli that occurs in the presence of a strong spiritual entity. Anyways, this place is very popular among teenagers due to the numerous rumors that surround it. The road is about a mile long with several hundred crosses, like a holy cross, made out of many materials scattered throughout the road. It's insanely creepy, and so is the backstory to it. They say that a man went insane and killed his wife and child, believing it to be God's will. He then created several hundred holy crosses of all signs with prayers etched into each one. This is just the rumors, of course. Nevertheless, there is a strong feeling of dread there even during the day, and I tend to stay away from it at all times. I foolishly gave in to peer pressure and led the way along with Becca due to the fact that it's near impossible to find, even to the point where people believe that it only appears to those who can speak to the dead, hence why they made me lead the way. We eventually found the road and parked our car to the side next to the cross the size of an electrical pole. We then began to walk around the road in an attempt to seek out the spirit of the wife and child. Becca was using me as a ghost detector, and it was incredibly demeaning and aggravating. However, no matter how much I told her it doesn't work like that, she continued to use me so. She's lucky I have a high tolerance to her shenanigans. About an hour passed, and my friends were complaining that although the place was incredibly terrifying, there were no ghosts. We began to walk back to the car when I noticed a small shack on the other side of the road. I said that we should check it out, but everyone was too chicken. Me, Becca, and about 3 other people decided to go while 3 people stayed by the car like very intelligent people. As we walked toward the shack, I began to realize that it was actually a small home. It was the home where the rumored terrors occurred. At this point, my mind was telling to stay as far away from the place as possible. I told everyone that it wasn't worth it, and they took this as a sign that the ghosts were there and that I was too stubborn to admit it. However, they were right. I could feel a strong presence of dread emanating from the home. I wanted nothing to do with it. While everyone walked in, I made the mistake of walking off into the woods. Let me explain my incredibly stupid decision. I felt so sick to my stomach that I swear I was experiencing minor cases of vertigo. I couldn't experience any form of balance, and everything was getting blurry. This is when I see something that still creeps me out to the core. I felt a throbbing in my head when I faced a small area in the woods. At the center of this was a shadow, a very large muscular man-sized shadow. I knew I had to get away. I didn't care if I wasn't sure what it was. I screamed and told to go away with as much force as I could. The shadow then lifted up its hand and pointed at me. I then immediately turned around and ran. I ran as fast as I could. I thought I was going to die. As I was running for dear life, I ran into a smaller figure. I screamed very loud, and so did the figure. It turned out to be Becca. She said she got worried after a while because she felt a bit sick in the house and I was missing. She was calling for me. However, I wasn't far enough from the home to not hear her. I decided not to care and told her we had to get out of here. She kept pestering me why and was trying to keep me from running. I told her that she was being that one stupid, overly brave girl who dies in the films because she won't listen. She began to laugh and started booing me, mocking me. I told her to shut up and then she suddenly stopped. Her face went pale, and she slowly turned around. She then screamed and ran. The figure was behind us and was very close. We ran to the car and made sure everyone was in, and then we floored it. To this day, I believe it to be the restless spirit of the man who created the road in the first place. I haven't gone back ever since. When I was younger, back in the mid-70s, my husband and I lived in an apartment complex. We were fairly well acquainted with the couple who lived above us. They were an attractive couple, but their relationship had been a volatile one to say the least. They fought constantly over any and everything, and from time to time, they'd even been known to take shots at each other with a snub-nosed .38 pistol the man owned. One night, what I'd feared for months happened. They got into one of their heated arguments, but this time it ended when the woman shot the man to death with his own gun. The man fell to his death on my porch, right in front of my front door. No charges were brought against her after the woman pleaded self-defense. Less than a week after the man's death, she began to behave irrationally. She became jittery and claimed to have seen the man in her bedroom on more than a few occasions. Once, she'd even said she saw him climbing up the wall outside her bedroom window. Less than 2 months later, the woman packed up and moved hastily out of the apartment, and no one ever saw her again. Then, one night about 6 months after the man had gotten killed, my husband and I were entertaining friends. Among them had been my husband's uncle, who'd been legally blind since his early teens. It was late summer, and as will happen in summer, a fierce thunderstorm struck, with plenty of lightning, high winds, and blowing rain. The storm lasted for all of 20 minutes. However, the festive mood left with the storm, and everyone prepared to leave for home. My husband and I walked to the door with our guests. I was the first to reach the door, only to find that something was blocking the screen door. But I couldn't see anything that could have been responsible for it. After pushing hard a few times, the door finally opened, and I stepped out onto the rain-drenched porch and saw that something was wrong. Even though the entire porch was soaked, the spot in front of my door was bone dry, and what was even more eerie was the fact that the dry spot was in the shape of a human being, from the shape of the head down to the feet, and it was lying in the exact position my neighbor had fallen when his wife shot him. No one wanted to believe it, even though several people witnessed this weird sight. To validate for himself, my husband's uncle leaned down and fell along the dry spot with his hand, and it left him speechless. We moved out of our apartment several months later, but until we did, occurrences that could not be explained happened in the apartment. I knew it was my neighbor. He wasn't ready to go, and until this day, I believe that he still haunts that particular apartment. I am new to this site, so I'll try to tell this story to the best of my memory. There are 3 odd occurrences which my mother witnessed in her home. My mother grew up in a small home in Alabama. The house was genuinely nice and welcoming from the outside. It was 1 story with a large backyard and 4 rooms. One night, my mother was studying for a test in school. She was alone in her room, and my grandparents were asleep. Suddenly, the drawers in the corner of her room began to shake, and the knobs were rattling violently. After a few minutes, they just stopped as if nothing had happened. My mother, being a very strong woman, shook it off and went back to studying. In the living room of my grandparents' house, they had a glass ashtray due to the fact that my grandfather smoked. One night, my mother and my grandfather were watching TV when all of a sudden the ashtray began to shake. It wasn't just shaking though, it was rolling in a circle on its side. After a few minutes, it began to shake violently, then shattered, shooting glass all over the room. Third, and finally, when my brother was 5, he, my mother, and father were visiting the house. My uncle had bought him a remote control car as a present. One day, the car and remote were sitting on the table beside the whole family watching TV, when all of a sudden, the car drives off the table onto the floor. It started doing circles around the house, driving from room to room without hitting a thing. It drove for about 2 minutes and then stopped. When I was in the house, it always felt eerie. I always had a sense of something watching me or following me as I trotted down the hall. It did not seem malevolent, yet it was mischievous. So my mother decided to research the house. She found that an old woman had lived there for a very long time before falling off the front porch step and dying. God bless her. So that's all for now. But I have a few more stories of my mother's encounters. And yes, she is partially psychic. A few weeks ago, my friend Katie and her brother Patrick were talking to this new girl at school. She is a bit off and a sort of scene kid. Anyways, they began talking about religion, and the girl mentions that she is a witch. Patrick, being the skeptical smartass, begins to mock her beliefs. It's safe to say this didn't end well. The girl threatened to put a curse on his family, that a dark spirit would cause torment on his home and anyone near him. A few days passed and things were fine. Patrick would continue to mock her, and she eventually performed said curse upon him. She claimed to have done it at her home. The next day, she offered him some cookies, which he foolishly accepted against my warning. Soon, however, the curse began to appear real. He began talking about sleepless nights, things moving, seeing shadows, etc. I thought he was joking. However, I was convinced otherwise. One night, Katie calls me asking to spend the night because she keeps hearing whispering in her room, along with feeling a strong presence like someone is there. I welcomed her in my home and things went by fine. Absolutely no paranormal event occurred while she was over, which was abnormal, as my usual ghost problems manifest themselves at all times. However, when she left, these same events seemed to be further aggravating the normal paranormal activity that occurs near me. Normally, if you've read my previous story, you know this. Causal paranormal events will occur, such as objects vanishing or conveniently appearing when I need them. Electronic devices either experience static or just continuously act on their own, even if they are new or nothing is wrong with them. Could a witch truly send a violent spirit after someone? And could a spirit move on to another person? I'm going to try to perform a cleansing in my home, but I'd like for some advice just to make sure. Another thing, my dog will on occasion stare directly behind me for hours and continuously bark at thin air. I fear she can sense the spirit. This story is not very extravagant in the least. However, it is genuine, and I just wanted to share it in case any like-minded individuals experienced any similar things and want to share their thoughts, opinions, etc. All right, well, I was visiting a friend of mine, and after some time, we were having dinner. Her dining room is beautiful. She has a glass table and a lot of room. Now, it was me, her, Sandra, her husband, her father, and my best friend. We were all sitting around the glass table and conversing after the meal, when suddenly from the peripheral view of my eye, I saw something black glide straight underneath the glass table. It was a blur, but it was definitely black and disappeared at a speed as it swooped to the table underneath. Now, it's probably useful to note that I used to wear a lot of black during my teenage years, back when this had occurred. So I had imagined I must have dropped the sleeve of my jacket or something. I used to always place my trench coats over the chairs, etc. So, as everyone begins chatting away and engage in conversation, I half-heartedly begin to listen to the discussion as I look for what it was that I possibly could have dropped. I searched left, right, and suddenly realized that the conversation had stopped. I looked up to meet Sandra's eyes, and she grinned knowingly as if she knew what I was looking for. You saw it too, didn't you? I looked up at her with a clueless expression. You saw that thing swoop from underneath the table. And I freak out you saw that. I thought I was losing my mind. And the conversation just broke into the new discussion about how the thing moved, how clear and vivid it was. And she even laughed as she recalled me looking for my black sleeves clueless. Now, it brings me to wonder, is there anything that this might be? Have any of you experienced something similar? If so, what did you find out about it? Any folklore behind it? Myths/stories, etc. Any information, except dogma and preaching, please, would be great.